Alright, so Chris Curtis seems to be incapable of being in a normal, straightforward fight, and last night's UFC event proved that once again. Because yesterday, during his fight against Roman Kopylov, Curtis ate a head kick in the final seconds of the third round, and the referee Mark Smith stopped the fight with literally 1 second left on the clock, and yeah, let's just say that this has been received rather controversially by fans online. And although I've been a pretty big critic of Curtis for a while now, due to his lack of pressure and activity during his fights, I actually think he looked pretty good last night, and the fight as a whole was an absolute banger. But yeah, man, this stoppage is definitely questionable. Just to break down the sequence of events a little bit, Chris got head kicked with 5 seconds left in the whole fight, he gets dropped to his hands and knees while Roman walks off and celebrates, and after a moment of deliberation, the referee stepped in to officially stop the fight. And then of course, Chris being Chris starts throwing a temper tantrum while he's still in the octagon by saying that the stoppage was BS and nothing anybody says can calm the guy down. Which, if you've been paying attention to Chris's career throughout the last few years, then you'll know that this is par for the course for him, and I'll explain what I mean by this later in the video. Now, personally, I do think that this stoppage was a little bit on the early side for a number of different reasons. First and foremost, obviously there was 1 second left in the fight. Next reason is that Roman didn't even follow up with any additional strikes, but instead chose to walk off, so Chris really wasn't in any danger of absorbing additional damage. Last reason is that I wouldn't really say that Chris hit the ground in a manner that demonstrated he wasn't capable of possibly recovering from the knockdown. I mean, he did have enough presence of mind to get up to one knee, but that's exactly when the referee called off the fight. Look, it was more than likely that Chris was going to lose the fight via judge's decision anyway, so I understand why some fans are asking what does it matter if the fight was stopped when it was. And don't get me wrong, I'm not up in arms over this stoppage or anything. I personally would have let the fight play out until the horn sounded, especially seeing as Kopylov didn't follow up with the head kick, but that's just me. And just to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, in Mark's defense, Curtis could have played off getting hurt better than he did after he hit the ground. Not only that, when it comes to the referee's perspective, how much time is or isn't on the clock really should not be relevant to them. If a fighter gets hurt and the referee decides that the fighter cannot intelligently defend themselves, then it doesn't matter if there's 1 second left on the clock or 100. It's just their job to make that split-second judgment call for the sake of the athlete's well-being. That being said, I think that in this case, Mark's judgment was just a little bit off, and I do think that stopping the fight was a little unnecessary, especially seeing as Kopylov didn't move in to throw more strikes. Regardless, I think my biggest takeaway from this fight is that this is just another case of misfortune in Chris's career that seems to repeatedly find him. For example, when he first appeared on Dana White's Contender Series in 2018, he scored a pretty fantastic TKO stoppage, but was not awarded a UFC contract, even though it definitely would have gotten him into the UFC by today's standard for Contender Series. And then in his next fight against Kelvin Gastelum, Chris got dropped by a headbutt in the second round, but it was still counted as a knockdown in the eyes of the judges. And given how competitive this fight was, if it was officially seen as an illegal strike, it really might have been the difference between him losing by unanimous decision and getting the win. Chris and his team tried to appeal this decision due to the inadvertent headbutt, but of course the commission denied it. Then in his next fight against Nasruddin Imavov, Curtis once again got headbutted, but this time he was unable to continue fighting, but this time around the fight was ruled a no contest. Still a really unfortunate thing to have happened though. Then of course, in his most recent fight prior to the Kopylov fight, Curtis completely blew out his ACL against Brendan Allen to the point where he was hobbling around the ring visibly in pain, and when the final horn sounded, he sat up against the cage not being able to move. The guy really is just in an endless cycle of experiencing unfortunate events when he steps into the octagon, and I understand that Chris has become a bit of a meme to people lately for a number of different very valid reasons, but honestly, I can't help but feel some level of sympathy for him because he really has gotten unlucky more than a couple of times throughout his UFC career. That being said, if you yourself don't feel bad for him, I'm not gonna lie, I can kinda understand why. Because throughout the last couple of years, Chris has positioned himself in the eyes of fans as a bit of a sore loser, and I'm using other people's words here, not mine, something of a crybaby. Of course, the biggest example that comes to most people's minds is how he acted in the ending moments of his fight against Jack Hermanson. After getting outpointed by Jack for 3 full rounds, Chris started taunting him and showing his frustration at Jack's elusiveness and started acting like Jack was running away and avoiding fighting. In the last few seconds of the fight, Chris gave Jack the double middle fingers, and even after the final horn sounded, Chris started jogging around the octagon to make fun of Jack's game plan. But it's like, how is Chris going to say that a guy was running away and avoiding the fight when Jack threw more strikes by a wide margin and landed more than 2 times the amount of strikes that Chris landed? It's not Jack's problem that Chris couldn't land any strikes, and even though I'm sure it's annoying being in Chris's position here, he was really taking his frustration out on the wrong guy. I also found another temper tantrum that he threw in the cage Cage after he lost to Bilal Muhammad in 2014. And then we have the fact that Chris has officially retired from the sport 3 times already. He retired for the first time after he wasn't given the UFC contract after his Contender Series win. The second time was after he lost a rematch to Magomed Karimov during the PFL semifinals. Then he came out of retirement after he was slotted into the PFL finals, where he once again lost and then retired for a third time after getting KO'd by Ray Cooper. I know that not many people know of this, but for those who do, I know that this has been something that they've ridiculed him for throughout the years. And then of course, there's his infamous Twitter rants where he's been known to fly off the deep end both at fans as well as famous figures within the sport. Chris actually deleted his Twitter a couple of months ago for like the 69th time after he had his public feud with Sean Strickland and hasn't reactivated it since, but it's really easy to see some of his online tantrums through a simple Google search. For example, you have this tweet that he made after he lost to Jack Hermanson where he says that he should have prepared for a track meet instead of a fight, and then we have this tweet where he complains about how Marc-Andre Barriault fought dirty after Chris won the fight, by the way. Then there's this legendary Twitter tantrum where he goes off on how his fight against Kelvin Gastelum went while also telling a random Twitter user to fuck off. And then obviously there was the very messy and public falling out between Chris and Sean Strickland that took place entirely on Twitter. Mind you, there are countless other examples of Curtis getting into arguments with fans online where you can tell what they say gets on his nerves and he takes offense to it. So yeah, with all this being said, and just to tie this back into his fight yesterday, although I can objectively say that Chris has run into a really weird string of unfortunate events throughout his career, I can definitely understand why his goodwill amongst fans has ran out due to his actions both in and out of the cage. Anyways, that's the video for today. Definitely let me know what you think about last night's stoppage. Do you think that Mark Smith made a mistake in stopping the fight when he did, or do you think that Chris has every right to be upset? As always, if you like the video, then like the video, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.